Hello, and welcome everybody. This is the panel on digital well-being, and my name is Michele Di Paola. I will be your host for this panel, which, as you may know, is part of a longer and wider process, a long-term ongoing training course called Digital Transformers. And to talk about this, I'm quickly passing the floor to Kadri Maripur from Salto PI to tell us more about the process and to introduce the whole activity today. Please, Kadri.
Thank you. And hello and welcome everybody who are listening and also our panelists. I am glad to welcome you on our fourth panel on the focuses on digital transformation. Altogether, we have 6 panels on this series. And you can see also the previous ones in Salto P, Salto Participation Information Facebook, and Salto Inclusion and Diversity YouTube channel. This one will be focusing on digital well-being as an important topic that has been probably noticed in everyone's life during the past years. Also, a few words about the whole overall process that Michele mentioned. Digital transformation is a priority in the EU youth programs, and Salto B and Salto Inclusion and Diversity have been exploring it from different angles since 2021. And in one point, we decided to join the forces, and one of the outcomes was this process, Digital Transformers, which is partly 6 panel sessions, is one part of the project, and the other one is a training, partly online, partly residential, for youth workers on different aspects of digital transformation. And just this week, we finished the second call for applicants. So I'm also glad to welcome 15 new participants on board there. Generally, to sum up, if you'd like to learn more about digital transformation or digital well-being, you're welcome to visit Participation Resource Pool. And you can also find there the reports that were the consequence or the outcome of 1.5 years work on the topic of digital transformation and what it could mean for the youth field in Europe. And I would be now also glad to hand over to Enrique from Salto Inclusion and Diversity.
All right, thank you, Kadri, and good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, quite excited to organize this panel here and have this discussion about mental health. For us in Salto Inclusion Diversity, we started diving into the topic with the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, and we were coordinating a study on the quality of online blended and hybrid mobility activities. So we were looking how the activities were being adapted to the COVID-19 pandemic. And the issue of digital fatigue, for example, lack of motivation, interest, were things that were being repeated when we were approaching colleagues and also youth work practitioners during our study. And we also realized that because of the pandemic and the way that the activities were being adapted, many times just mimicking the traditional non-formal environments, but without taking into consideration the different needs and different ways of or needs that are need to be taken into account now when we move online. We cannot just replicate things as used to. And we realized that this also caused a big impact on the young people with fewer opportunities, and because of these changes that were not always very well thought through, or because basically we didn't have the experience, that also led to increase the digital gap. So we were confronted with questions on how to engage young people with few opportunities online, how to avoid fatigue and participants drop out, because it's also quite a constant thing that happened during these times. And in general, how we can also use online tools to support mental health of young people with few opportunities with youth workers and so on. So there are many questions that were raised during this study. Of course, some insights that came through, and you can also find it in the digitalinclusion.saltoyouth.net website. that will be shared in the link in the chat in a moment. But this was for us also motivation to join forces with Salto Participation and Information and try to understand more also the topic of mental health. So that's why we're also hosting this webinar here and carrying on also with the online training in a few days on the topic. So really excited to learn more about it and hopefully have some answers to the questions that we've been thinking about for quite some time. So yeah, that's it by now.
Thank you very much, Enrique, and thank you, Kadri, also. So yeah, it's time to kickstart our discussion about digital well-being. So also I'm curious about you all listening and watching the broadcast from the different online channels. If you want to quickly write us in the comment where you are connected from and where you are now following our broadcast, please feel free to do it in the comments in the different social media platforms and channels you are using to attend our discussion. And while you do it, I'm now willing to introduce our guests. So we have a little presentation to show you with all the names and faces and titles of our guests today, starting from Simona Muschetz. She holds a bachelor in international relations. She's working as a freelance trainer in human rights education and global education for the past 15 years. She's the president of the Ljubljana Pride Association and manages a team of 10 staff and full-time volunteers, all coming from LGBTIQ+ community. She led several large-scale projects on developing an intersectional approach to inclusive organization and co-authored and edited several educational manuals on transformation of hate speech and inclusive organization. And she bases her work on non-formal education, anti-racism, non-violent communication, restorative practice, empowerment of vulnerable groups through storytelling and intersectionality. Another guest of ours today is Dragan Atanasov, acting as a Secretary General of the Union for Youth Work, the National Association of Youth Workers and Youth Work Providers in North Macedonia. He's a trainer, researcher, evaluator, and author, specialized in youth work recognition, youth policy, cultural diversity, and community development, with over 10 years of experience in conducting research and assessment in the field of youth work, designing and delivering non-formal education activities, developing policy documents, and monitoring and evaluating programs. And she will join us soon. We will also have Dr. Amy Orben. She's a program leader, track scientist at the MRC Cognition and Brain Sciences unit at the University of Cambridge, a college research fellow at Emmanuel College, and she leads a research group investigating the links between digital technology use, mental health, and cognition in adolescents. She campaigns for the adoption of more transparent and open scientific practices, and she completed a DPhil, which is the Oxford equivalent of a PhD in experimental psychology at the University of Oxford, indeed, for which she was awarded the British Psychological Society Award for Outstanding Contribution to Doctoral Research. And as I said, she will join us in a while. She is now connected somewhere else, and she will join us soon enough. But without further ado, it's time to step forward in our discussion. I also want to remember that everything discussed and told in here will be object of a graphic recording by our graphical recording person, Dace Anderson, which is here connected with us. So we will see a glimpse, at least a glimpse of her work later on towards the end of the discussion, so we can get a full glimpse. But Dace, if you want to say hello to everybody, you are now on, so please do it.
Yes, hello. I'm more not about talking, more about drawing, and so we will see summary of this talk.
Perfect. So we leave you to drawing, and we now step forward and have our guests on screen to start the discussion with the first question, which is the same question for the both of you. So as you all understood from Kadri and Enrique, we are now inside a longer process, this digital transformers training course. And in the upcoming session, which will be exactly about digital well-being, preparing that section, we identified some different aspects as, let's say, kind of ingredients of what we are trying to define as digital well-being. So our personal list of ingredients for this kind of recipe includes healthy use of devices, includes digital literacy to avoid, frustration of the users and so on, includes access to proper technology to try to bridge the digital divide, and of course includes a condition of security and privacy, as well as inclusive and diverse participation that was already a specific topic of our second panel. So we also dealt with that before. So my first question to Simona and Dragan, and maybe Ami if she join us on time, would be, what would be your personal recipe of digital well-being? Which are your ingredients? So is this list working for you, and why? Or is there any other ingredient that you would add to the recipe to better define and better shape what is digital well-being in your opinion? And of course, again, why? I would start with Simona, and I'm very curious to hear from you about this topic. Please.
Hi everyone. Thank you, Michele, for the introduction and for the questions. So as you heard in the introduction, what I do primarily is that I for years.
Simona, excuse me. I'm stopping you because I'm hearing a strange sound effect. So I'm wondering if it's just me, or there is some kind of trouble with the microphone. Maybe I can ask you to try again. Of course, we tried and everything was working, but that's the nice side of technology, that things happen whenever you less expect them. So let's try again. Let's see if this time we can hear you better, or maybe I can ask you to switch off any kind of effect or external microphone or whatever else could be affecting the quality of sound. Maybe if you have the streaming open somewhere else, you can maybe try to close it, or let's see if now the situation would improve. Please, let's try again, Simona.
Okay. How is my sound now?
Still somehow problematic all of a sudden. There is a kind of an echo and distorted noise. So I would say maybe let's ask Dragan to step in first, and meanwhile I would ask you to maybe try to, I don't know, reset the audio setting, or maybe even to reconnect, so that we try to get rid of the problem in the old-fashioned way. So if Simona, you can try to disconnect and reconnect. Meanwhile, we pass to Dragan and we see his own answer to the same question. Let's see if we can make it.
Hello, Michele. Hello, everyone. I hope my voice.
Your one is fine. So let's see if Simona can fix it. Maybe removing headphones or whatever else, or again reconnecting to the channel. But meanwhile, let's see from you your ingredients to digital well-being. Are you agreeing with the ones we drafted? There are more or less, maybe because some of those is not belonging there in your opinion. I'm just curious to hear what you think about
that. Thanks, Michele, and actually thanks for sending also beforehand, so we could reflect about them, because it's not an easy question actually if you think about. I think essentially this list is good. It's quite extensive. What I like, and that's the first thing I would like to say, is that it's taking a rights-based approach, which is not something that we often do. I think with speaking of technology and internet, we kind of assume that everyone has the equal access to the digital world and to technology that they need, and we tend to forget that internet and technology, they are not per se inclusive, that sometimes there need to be adaptations. to the different needs of different people. And this is something that we also need to keep in mind in youth work. So that's the first thing I wanted to point out. Secondly, I think what is important is for all of us to reflect, what do actually all these terms, what do they mean? So for example, digital literacy, I think it's a very important one. But when we think about it, we should go beyond thinking of how, for example, to use a phone or how to use a certain digital learning platform, for example. Because being in the digital world and interacting with people in online via different social media and different platforms, etc., it's a completely different thing from being in the real world. I think we need to stop thinking that everything we are doing in the real life, we are just doing it online and it all remains the same. I think essentially what we need to learn how to do is how to behave in a healthy way in the digital world using technology, and how to really take care of our needs and what is happening to us and what we want to achieve and what we want to do with others when we are online. And I think to many of us who are a bit older, who didn't grow up with the internet, this is not a thing that comes naturally. It's not something that we have always known how to do. So my own recipe on digital well-being might not be actually very relevant to young people nowadays, because they've grown up in a different way. I think we have to get used to the fact that in working with young people, we are now dealing with digital natives. So young people who grew up from the very young age with the phones in their hands and with games and different applications that they used on their iPads. And they learned already in school how to interact online using different online platforms, even before we started introducing more in youth work. So if I say that, for example, I'm trying to balance between the time that I spend online and time that I spend offline, or that I'm switching off my notifications, or that I'm trying not to get hooked and addicted to news feeds on social media, for example, I don't know if that's very relevant, because we do see that young people spend most of the time online. So I don't know if it makes much sense to really try to drag them out from there and bring them back in real life, and to force this kind of like balanced approach. And I think it is important. I think all of us need to spend time outdoors and time communicating with people in the physical world and doing things in a different way without using the phones and technology and the digital environment. So I still think that all that matters, and I think that's important part of the recipe on how to keep digital well-being. However, I don't know how realistic that is with generations of young people who are very often more comfortable spending time online and communicating with their peers via different communication platforms like Discord, for example, than in real life. And I think it comes naturally that to them that a lot of what they do is now in a different setting. And that's why it's even more, I think, important to have this kind of list of or a recipe of how to achieve digital well-being, but then also to think what it really actually will mean from the perspective of the young person. Because as I said, it's the digital world. I don't think it's really a simple replacement of the things that we are doing in a certain way. It's an interaction in a completely different way. It's activism in a completely different way. So for example, if you think about the aspect of inclusive and diverse participation in the as part of the recipe, I would here also talk about activism. I think in the recent years, there has been a lot of criticism about clicktivism, for example, or putting things online and being part of an online campaign as a replacement to what is happening in real life when you go out for protest. But I think we should be criticizing less and actually thinking more about what the future of activism will be in the digital life, and what the future of communication and relationship building and trust building will be online. So I think the more we actually embrace technology and the virtual environment as part of us, the more this kind of recipe would make sense. So just a brief intro, and then we can talk more.
Thank you very much, Dragan, for all you said. Also for bringing up already this element of real life and digital life as if they were two different planets or two different elements, which is something which is being discussed a lot. And also this idea that so-called digital natives may have a different experience and a different background from one side, but from the other side, I guess that the recipe that you are drafting and we are drafting might also work for them as well. But I'm also now curious to hear from Simona, and most of all to hear if Simona can make her voice heard. So let's try. Let's keep finger crossed, everybody, and let's see if this time we'll make it. Simona.
Okay, so how do I sound now? Yes?
Perfect.
Okay, excellent.
Please.
Yes, so I will dive right into it, not to lose time. So I can definitely agree to where Dragan left off, which is, the digital world is the reality of young people. I mean, there is no, and also the last years with how we started to change our ways of working across society and going so much online, I think a lot of that will stay. So it's not reversible anymore. I don't feel that we will ever, not have such a strong digital life, as it's just going to be stronger. So I think that is part of the reality. But for me, when I think about the digital well-being, I have a very particular perspective on it, because I myself am part of, a marginalized group, or, experience that in my life. But most importantly, I work daily with young people and with people who experience marginalization. And I think that when we talk about well-being in general, but also in particular digital well-being, the experiences online are different for young people who in their lives daily are faced with, being racialized, experiencing transphobia, other forms of discrimination, shaming, a lot of hate. And we know, I mean, it's not a secret, we know that the internet and generally digital spaces have opened a lot of Pandora's boxes in that regard also. So I think for me, when I look at the list of these 5 areas, like for digital well-being that you have mapped, like healthy use of devices, digital literacy, access to more technology, yes, all of that very, very nice and fine. But then we get to the last 2 ones, conditions of security and privacy. So what does security mean in this regard? When you are exposed to being a target because of your identity, or because in this case, like what even Dragan was referring to, like if you expose yourself and become like an activist in the digital world, a young person, you can try to be everything from an influencer to just an active person on TikTok. And then there is going to be a lot of backlash if you are someone who is belonging to any kind of marginalized group, or even especially if you're speaking up for certain rights or certain social changes. So I think this becomes a very, very important issue. And then it's also connected to, the inclusive and diverse participation, because not all young people have equal capacity or ability to be included in society, including the digital world. And, and we also need different support in order to be able to participate fully. I think these are not concepts that would be new. I think all of these concepts in youth work have been there for years. It's just that now they also get this element of how do we deal with them in the digital world. So, for example, for me, one point that I would add there is that, I would add something there that would say building resilience and support. And what I mean by that is that when you are a young person coming from experiencing marginalization, discrimination, and hate, violence basically online quite a lot, the first thing that I think is super important is for other people who don't necessarily experience the same way this phenomena, that they give you recognition for it. So basically, just to be recognized in your experience, that it is different, that it is more difficult, that it takes a toll on you. When you need different type of understanding and support to be able then to participate, I think, in the digital environment. And of course, I would say also it's not only recognition, it's also then measures need to be established. And this is something we are very good in the youth field. I think we are very good at creating spaces where we try to, challenge ourselves. What does it mean, an inclusive digital space for learning? What does it mean, spaces that are, safer for people who get targeted otherwise, and so on. And I think there's a lot of measures also how to do that in digital spaces. So I would say the recognition, the measures to support, and then within that to build actually also, young persons' resilience to withstand. Because this is part of the reality, it's not going away. We don't have a magic stick to tell all the bullies and all the shamers and all of that magically now you are doing a bad thing, I'm gonna make you disappear now. That's not how it works. So we need to find ways how to build this resilience together with the young people who experience it. And it's not possible. I think the biggest realization is that this is our common responsibility. This is not the responsibility of the communities or organizations or young people who are targeted, but it is our common responsibility to find ways to support and to take on part of the load, to take on part of the fight to make the digital experience safer, to make it more inclusive, to make it more participatory. Everyone needs to contribute to that. And I think this is, for me, the core of the well-being, For me, it's not necessarily talking about the individual single actions. They are very important because they showcase our willingness and awareness, but there's this general attitude and recognition. So I think this is something I would add there as a reflection point.
Yeah, let me unmute myself before speaking, and thank you very much, Simona. Just to let you know, in the end, there was a bit of a cracking noise again in the background. I mean, we can still understand you, and we got whatever you said, but just to let you know, if, I don't know, if there's some microphone or other device that you are using, it might be that it has some problem, or we are trying to see if we can arrange it any other way. But still, I want also to underline from what you said, this one more ingredient. So building resilience and give recognition, that's noted down and will be also taken into account in our training course. But it's also interesting to note down and take it into account in our discussion here. And on that perspective, I invite everybody which is now watching and listening to us to go on writing comments and questions in the different platforms you are using to follow us. Some are already coming, so keep going like this, and then we will pick them up and go on answering them meanwhile. But we can already maybe get a couple of them which are directly connected to what we were saying now. So, for instance, one question directly for Dragan. How can communities and organizations work together to create a safer and more responsible online environment for young people? That's the huge $1 million question, I guess. But maybe you can maybe share your insight. And then also there is another one which is, I guess, partially also connected to this topic. It's more a comment by Alessandra saying that's why we should work in a parallel on human rights education applied to human rights online and to internet governance and to digital youth work when working with youth. I mean, youth as such is one entity, and so we should always keep this holistic approach, let's say, also connected to the digital environments. But if you want to also the invitation is open to Simona, briefly give some insight to the question of George regarding a possible way of communities and organizations to work together to ensure a safer and more responsible online environment. I know it will take maybe 2 months to answer this question, but we only have 2 minutes. So just some insights from your side. That would be nice to hear, please.
Yes, sure. I mean, I can say those very plastic, very obvious ones, right? So whenever anyone is organizing digital events, use small kind of like also tokens for visibility that you are thinking of the different communities. So for the LGBTIQ plus people, if they see that you are using pronouns, so when you put your name there for Zoom call or a call like we're having right now, and you put in brackets your pronouns, this is a very clear indication that you are willing to kind of like include the LGBTIQ plus young people with this kind of measures. And this is just one very, very obvious one. When it comes to, I can say, personal learning points for me in this process, I have learned so much from the anti-racist movement, from the organizations who work in that framework. And for example, in some of the digital meetings, like more political meetings, more meetings where you needed to discuss some hot topics and so on, they included some very interesting measures. For example, how to create within the digital space like that a safe person, to which, if somebody was triggered by a conversation, you could go to, things like this. There are these things that we know how to use in a physical space, and then to create some support mechanism, and then basically you transform them and make them applicable with different methods maybe, but with the same concept in the digital world, to give this signal out to people coming from marginalized communities. And I think what is for us important is that, I come from a framework where we work a lot with LGBTIQ plus youth, right? So of course we are more skilled how to create more safer spaces for LGBTIQ plus youth, sure, because this is our main work. However, if I always have to be challenging myself also, what about all the young people who live in the intersection with other marginalization? How can I uphold the same type of standards and reflection for wider experiences of marginalization? And I think for me, this is the core point. If everyone, be it you are someone working with young people with marginalized backgrounds that you know of, or that this is your primary dedication or not, that you have that reflection with your team, within your organization, and that you are able to identify what are the things that you can offer for wider inclusion, for showing this support. Because we know in practice that we can't create a perfect experience, meaning that there cannot be this one Zoom 90-minute model session that is going to be perfectly inclusive and participatory for everyone. That's not what the expectation is, but the expectation of somebody thinks about it. Somebody thinks about what could we do better. And when young people also come with feedback to you, that you are there to listen to what they could use and need. And I think without the resistance, without diminishing that need, I think this is something that can make a lot of difference. Just not to repeat the societal stereotypes of because there's a lot of barriers in society already, or a lot of stereotypes toward marginalized communities, then just not to repeat those in our processes of planning educational activities and processes.
Thank you, Simona. Meanwhile, Amy Orban joined us as announced. So welcome, Amy. And we will soon pass the floor to you as well. We are now answering a previous question from the audience. So I don't know if Dragan wants to add something on this perspective or not.
Yeah, I would say it's important not to think that we know it all. Not to think that we know the needs by default of young people in the online environment, or the challenges or the threats, because they're just places where young people are and youth workers are not. And there will be always, or not even only youth workers, but adults are not present. And there are places where that will always be the case. So for me, it's about dialogue, and it's about open communication to see what young people really need from us, from the rest of the society, basically from, as you were saying, George, from communities and from organizations, and I would say from youth workers, to be in a safe and healthy environment online, and what it actually means for them, and what we can do without also interfering in their own space. Because I don't think that youth workers should just invade the online environment of young people without being even invited there. Like, there are, for example, very good examples of using, let's say, Discord in youth exchanges, or communicating with young people in Discord. So for me, I think on the one hand, I think this is a good example. It's about going where young people are and meeting them there and providing the support in a way that seems to work for them. But on the other hand, for me, it's always a question: do young people want us there? Should we be there? Or are we inviting a space? So if young people want to be in Discord and talk about games and play games and talk to their peers, it doesn't mean they want to talk to youth workers in Discord. So for me, a little bit this, I know it might be now a provocation, because we are usually talking about using Discord and other digital tools where young people are in youth work as good, positive examples. However, I would also like to open the discussion: how do we know? Have we actually asked young people are we invited there? So maybe instead of that, we need to also talk to them and to see where they are and what they need from us.
Thank you very much. And you may see that comments are coming, supporting your point of view. So I want to ask the same question that I asked to you already, also to Amy Orban, which just joined us. We were discussing about a possible recipe, or anyway ingredients to define what is digital well-being. As I said, we identified a few of them in our digital transformers training course: healthy use of devices, digital literacy, access to technology, conditions of security and privacy, inclusive and diverse participation. So we were seeing with our other guests if the list is complete or there's something to add. Simona proposed to add at least one other ingredient to the recipe, which is building resilience and giving recognition to the people included in online activities. And now we are curious also to hear from you, Amy, if the list works for you as well, or if you have other ingredients to add, or maybe some other to take out of the list, or whatever thing you want to give us to this, please.
Well, it's been really inspiring to hear the other answers, and I think there was a mention about how different young people react differently to different types of content, or that digital well-being is not the same for everyone, and I think I'd just like to echo that. So it's not a one-size-fits-all solution or thing, and I think it's a lot. In a way, it's very different too. So I work a lot with policymakers who come from the health area. And so they want things like dose response relationships, kind of how much will content X impact mental health or outcomes, educational outcomes. And I think for the digital, we don't have that. It will be heavily individual. And so I think I think it was great to hear that already in the answers there. And I think also that the concept of all these different concepts you mentioned will change over time. We have different technologies emerging on a monthly basis, and also the world is changing so quick. So something that might have been really helpful in connecting young people might feel stifling in times of conflict when you're seeing all these videos on TikTok about young, maybe people like you, but in Ukraine, or so I think we need to just understand that the links are really diverse, and they will probably, what digital well-being is for one person will change over time, and it will be different between people as well. So just keeping that flexibility in mind is really crucial, in my opinion.
Thank you very much. So now we are ready to go to the second round of questions, and this time I wanted to ask a specific question to each of you, according also to your different backgrounds and experiences. So Amy, I would start from you, if you don't mind. We read your profile. We know that you have an academic background and work with university and so on. So my question would be, if in your research, you did investigate the connection between mental health, technology, cognition. So if you could summarize for us the main key findings connected to digital well-being in your research. I know that this is a typical question that is trying to ask you to squeeze years of work in a few words.
That's fine. I've practiced,
anyway.
It's a good question as well. So yeah, so I lead a research group at the University of Cambridge, funded directly by government through the Medical Research Council. So we're really focused on mental health and understanding how the digital environment might impact it. And the background there is that we've seen a decrease in mental health in many countries across the EU, in America, as well as in the UK over the last few years, 10 years or so for most of them. And we've also seen an uptick in digitalization at the same time. And we still don't know how much these two trends are linked and what's driving that link specifically. So our kind of mission is to do work in that space to understand those links, to both inform interventions. We work mainly with clinicians, so in mental health clinics, but also to inform policy, things like recommendations and regulations around screen time and digital technology use in kids. And I think if I would need to summarize it in 2 words, it's that it's complicated. But I have a bit more time, so I can elaborate a bit. So I think it's normal that we get concerned about new technologies. And I think I sent around a link that will be shared with you later, that about a longer talk that I gave around kind of societal concerns about new technologies emerging again and again, whether that's the radio in the 1940s or the television or video games, and now phones and the digital and the internet. There we go, like magic. And I think the real question is, what makes now different? Should we be more concerned now with social media, with something that's so interactive, where likes quantify feedback, and that might really impact young people at a really vulnerable stage in their development, where they really care about what others think about them, for example. And so I think what we found is that it depends on both the type of use and the type of user. So we cannot just say, how does the digital impact mental health? Because that's way too broad. That's a question we can never answer. I think even the question about how does social media impact mental health is very broad, because every young person uses social media differently. Every platform is slightly different, and the same platform can be very different for different young people as well. So the algorithmic driving of content makes it very difficult to know how a specific person in front of you is actually using and being impacted by technology. So the type of technology use is really important to know. And we've been doing a lot of methodological innovation about how can we measure that, because we can't measure it in time spent online. 20 minutes chatting to a distant friend will have a very different impact than 20 minutes looking at self-harm content, for example, if I'm being very extreme. So the focus of society and politicians on time as our main currency of impact is misguided. And then the other thing is that it depends on the type of user as well. And again, so my work looks at broad population averages. So we take thousands, often 15, 17,000 data points from young people, and we mush them all together. We average them. So there is a lot of variation between young people, but we really just look at the averages. And there we do see that, for example, there are more negative bidirectional links between social media use and life satisfaction in girls rather than boys at specific ages, for example. But also that throughout adolescence, this link between social media use and well-being and mental health seems to vary. And so I'm really interested in how adolescent development, these processes we go through, both socially, biologically, cognitively, impact how social media impacts us. So I think there's another link that gives a bit of an overview of my initial work as well, that I've put in there, where I think my core message would be that technology is really complicated, and the impact depends on how it's used and who uses it. And the way I often explain it to journalists is that you wouldn't trust me if I said I'd know exactly how a young person across from me will react to eating a chocolate bar if I've never met that person before. Because I wouldn't know, are they a diabetic? Then that chocolate bar might be really harmful. Or have they just come off the football pitch after a massive match? Have they had 50 chocolate bars beforehand? Or, have they had none? Or do they eat the chocolate bar because they're sad or because they're hungry? All of these questions are really important. And we know that when we talk about things like diet, and we need that same amount of nuance when we talk about technology. Who's that young person in front of us? How are they using it? What are their motivations? How does it fit into their lives? And I think we need to get, for me, the kind of politicians and policymakers there to that understanding of that complexity. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Amy. And it's complicated. It's a very nice title. I remember it was used already by by someone to write a book about social media years ago. So here we go again. And also thanks for the elements you shared about your research, which is very interesting and impressive, also for the number of data points you mentioned. But yes, I guess this idea of trying to stay away from the measure of time as the only indicator of a healthy relationship with technology and devices could be a very important remark to keep in mind, or not. Let's see what is the opinion of also of our listeners and viewers, our audience, which is always able to interact with us, writing in the comments anyway. Meanwhile, I'm asking a question to Simona. We got to know each other during the 3rd European Youth Work Convention in pandemic time, and everything there was entirely online for the COVID restrictions. So a very huge event, moved completely inside digital spaces. Very intense workflow, and you know more than everybody what this intense word means. You also work in an organization which has a wide team, working meeting almost entirely online, or maybe entirely online. I'm not sure that you will let us know more. So my question is, what this experience teach you about practical idea of digital well-being, and insight that you could share with us from these experiences, also how to shape things in a way that even with all this diversity and complication that Amy helped us to put under the lens, the experience overall is an experience of well-being as much as possible. Simona, I leave the floor to you.
Thank you. I hope we can hear each other well with my sound. Yes, so I am professionally involved and work for a digital online campaigning organization. So I'm actually working for one of those organizations who can sometimes be blamed for the clicktivisms, because part of what my organization does is to organize mass petitions. And we target EU institutions to affect policy change. But in practice, it means that since 2014, 2015, I've been working in a distributed team online. So by the time the rest of the world started to switch to Zoom meetings and online working from home processes in 2020, I was like, now finally everyone will understand what my past 6 years have been like, because I already started working in that kind of environment a bit earlier. So what I can say, so like talking from a perspective of a person who works in that environment, and what we've learned in our organization, we are at this moment plus minus 30 staff members across 9 different countries. And we work fully digitalized. And what we have learned is that online communication, coupled with intercultural differences, it's really hard. It's really, really very difficult to create a certain level of things that you have when you are working in the same physical space. So the kind of team connectedness, the kind of situation when you are discussing some issues, and then when you have a person in front of you in the room, you can read their face, you can feel a bit their reaction to what is happening, you can see if they go out after the meeting and they're not feeling so well, or you can see them how life is developing for them in that work environment. But when you work only online, majority of that is not present. You can't read the same way what is happening for the people on the other side, especially when you have a wider team, and you don't necessarily get to spend one-on-one in this digital environment, but rather you need to have like group team meetings and group processes to organize work day to day. So this has been one very important struggle we've been having in the organization. And in that regard, for a team that works together over a longer period of time, for an organization to build the modus operandi around it, for us, it is crucial to be able to periodically meet offline. The offline interaction, when once a year maybe the whole team gets together, and we also have mechanisms of sub-team meetings in person, that's the part where we build the interaction, the connection, the relationship much more. And we have then quite good and well-established processes how to organize the work, the workflows, sometimes maybe for many people even more efficient than if we were all sitting in the same office. I think that the digital space and organizing your work around it can offer a lot of possibilities for people who are more introverted, for people who need more time to think before acting, reacting, speaking, and so on. So it brings a lot of benefits. But in our experience, that just to get over like this kind of cultural differences, communicational gaps, and the relationship building, we still need the offline being together. So I think, I think this has been one of the bigger lessons for me throughout the past years, that and I really feel the same thing with my youth work, because parallel to this, I'm involved with as a trainer, but also as a manager of a youth organization, and for at least for the young people we work with primarily, it is also very, very important to be able to offer spaces where people can physically meet. It doesn't fit for everyone. Some people can get in touch with us better online, and then of course we support that. But for a lot of people, the physical interaction, being together in one space, the intimacy, the relationship that is built through that, it's still it cannot be substituted at this point. At least I don't think so.
Okay, thank you very much, Simona, for sharing. Thank you for sharing the experience and the learning that you got out of there. I invite again our audience to comment and ask questions on the social media platforms you are using. But now I want also to ask a specific question to Dragan. I know you have a project in which you researched a holistic approach to well-being for young people. So I would like to ask you if you can share the result of this research and the insight about what supports well-being of young people in your in your experience. So I know that also this involved creating an app or some digital tools. So we're going back to what Amy was mentioning in the beginning, that using devices or anyway online elements could also be a time for fostering well-being and not necessarily a time for harming or anyway disrupting well-being. So Dragan, I'm curious, tell us more about this project, please.
Yeah, so this is the second project in a row on positive mental health, and in this one we decided to focus on developing a digital app which can be used by youth workers to support young people in their positive mental health and well-being online. And the app is imagined to be used standalone by young people, but also in addition to other approaches of youth workers. So it will be available soon online. But what is interesting, I think, is when we did focus groups with young people on what they would like to see in this app, or how this app that supports their digital well-being would work, the greatest demand that came from them was about communication and interaction with other users. And for me, this was a big surprise. Like, what they wanted from an app that they install on their phone and that offers features like, for example, mood tracking, emergency help, or different, for example, breathing exercises, calming down, dealing with different emotions, etc. The first top need was that they wanted to interact with others, which brings me back to the first project that we did, which precedes the project for developing the app, and you have the link in the chat. And this project was actually about creating a theoretical framework and an approach for supporting positive mental health through youth work. And there we explored different domains. And of course, there were multiple factors that we found support the state of well-being in young people. And this included emotional support, the physical dimension, environment or the nature, spiritual, social, intellectual, and the digital world was part of it. But in one of the articles that one of my colleagues prepared, he spoke about, and that was about really using digital tools and versus being outside and with other people. He spoke about, he cited a study by Dr. Nicholas Cardenas, who spoke of three basic human drives in human needs. And they were the need to belong and feel connected with others and relate to them. So that's the first one. Then the need to discover new things. And the third one is the need to challenge oneself and reach goals. So three basic drivers that could provide, that could enable, or that would enable young person to, or any individual to be healthy mentally. And if you think about these basic needs, it's not that the digital world does not meet them. So the need to belong and to feel connected to others, or the need to discover new things, all of this is available also online, maybe even much more than if you are not connected to the internet. Like what we are seeing, for example, in the moment by many young people is that how strongly attached they feel to imaginary communities outside of their own place of living. So they feel much closer to somebody who lives on the other side of the world because they can connect online and they can find somebody who is similar to them in many other ways compared to, for example, their neighbors. So we see young people associating themselves with this kind of online groups more than with their town or their school or their even nation. Like I see in my country that young people follow and care more of what is happening with Greta's protests, or in the US with different movements, than what is happening in their own town on the square, because this is how they connect and interact. So my point was, and it goes back to what I was saying at the very beginning, it's not that when we talk about being in the digital world, it's not the same things just done virtually. It's different way of interacting, and it's different way of connecting with others. And then when you talk about the basic human needs and drives, it's about meeting those drives and needs differently. So I think it is essential for us to understand that to learn how to approach this in a healthy way, how to take care of ourselves when, for example, we are overloaded with communication online. like I'm not a scientist and I'm not an anthropologist, but it doesn't take much thinking to really consider that maybe like 200 or 100 years ago, people lived in a village and they were surrounded by, let's say, 200, 300 individuals, majority of the world's population. Nowadays, we interact with thousands of people online. So how to manage those expectations and interactions, communications and relationships and the adventure and the safety aspect in an environment which is much wider and much more chaotic than what we see in real life. So going back to your question, Michele, the two projects opened more questions than that they provided answers. What we are working on now is really to develop this app that will provide a digital tool for the youth worker to be able to use in addition to the methodology that they're using otherwise, because I do not believe that youth work and youth workers should suddenly fully move online and abandon what we used to do and how we do things with young people. However, we need to find tools that work and that can help and enrich our way and our abilities to basically interact and support young people online, if that makes sense.
Thank you very much, Dragan. I invite again for questions or comments from our audience side, but also from the three of you. If there's something that struck your attention from the answers that you heard from some of the other members of the discussion, now is the time, or would be the time to maybe pick it up and comment or exchange a few words between the three of you. So I'm wondering now if there's something that you would like to pick it up and comment from what you heard from some of the other guests. I'm asking the question to the three of you together. So let's see if there is anything that is to be discussed or commented by any of you. Wondering if...
Well, I thought Dragan's points were really insightful, that the way we interact online is very different. The underlying needs of that drive our behavior might be quite similar, but the way that then that plays out can be quite different. In parts, it's very similar as well, but things like that communications can really spread very quickly, that we get quantified feedback. I'm really interested in the kind of that many young people have real expectations, how many likes they will get, and then they might get more or less. And that's a really quantified version of being accepted or not. So my team is doing some work on that. But also things are permanent. They can be screenshotted. And so they can be shared more openly. And also that there are delays between communication. So young people that might ruminate more or kind of rethink what's happening socially in their mind a lot might find it more stressful that, you don't know if that person's seen your message or not. You don't know if your friend just didn't see your post come up due to the algorithm of Instagram, or that they decided not to like it. And so the sort of social currency of things become a lot more unclear. I think there's a lot more kind of thinking that young people need to do to understand where they sit in their social network and their hierarchies. So I thought that was a really insightful comment to make.
Thank you very much, Amy. We are getting many comments and from different elements that were discussed so far. So agreeing on the fact that we go where young people are and not creating spaces to invite them there. Also, we discussed the level of self-confidence, and of course, part of the job of the youth worker is to support young people in developing their own self-confidence. So it's again part of our duties to help there and build this self-confidence also in the online environment. There are now comments coming. Also, Milan commenting what Simona just said. So. Sharing.
Michele?
Yes, please.
So, because I would just like to connect specifically to what Dr. Amy Orban said, because like everything that you research, the general trends and all this, what both you and Dragan have kind of expressed about how, on one hand side, difficult it is to really understand the impact on the young people now with the digital world and this kind of like the mass of interaction that is there. So what I try to always bring to the light is that all of that complexity is much more complex for vulnerable groups. And it becomes much more impactful very often in a negative way to those who are experiencing marginalization, because they're easier targets. And then the hate and the targeting is multiplied in the same way as we could, see with everything else. So, for example, for me, what is very relevant is that when we are, as youth workers or trainers or like just people involved in supporting young people, when we are creating spaces to support them to become more active in society, to become activists, to become engaged citizens, to become a lot of those things that we want everyone to be and have access to, that we also consider on the toll. What are we really asking of people when they come from marginalized backgrounds? How much more exposed they are going to be, how much more targeted they're going to be, how much more vulnerable they are, and how much bigger of an armor they need to kind of like be able to be in that position. So there is a difference if you are, for example, a person of color in a predominantly white society like my own country, Slovenia, and then you would try to go and do social activism for, it doesn't matter, even environmental rights, right? But the point is that you are entering a hostile environment because activists and doing activism per se is not something that is positively accepted, and you will face backlash from opponents of that politically. But then because of your identity, you will be exposed to masses and masses of hate, and be it fat phobia, be it based on racism, be it based on homophobia, transphobia, and so on and so forth. And I think this is part of the reality as well. So for me, this is something I would just like to put out there, to work with more awareness around it, and that the way we build up young people and the way we create spaces for young people to get empowered, that we also consider this, that we don't amplify the precarity in which they are already finding themselves.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's really complicated because that precarity and vulnerability can be very different. So for different people, so I found there was some research done in the US recently showing that for transgender youth in the US, the access to social media might also be a really important way for them to develop their self-identity, to explore beyond their physical communities. But they're also incredibly vulnerable in certain ways as well. And so you're having to weigh up different risks. And I think that's why, even though I really just work with the data and the numbers, I think it's really comes down to the certain individual who's in front of you, and the person, naturally youth workers or clinicians or parents need to be able to be educated to make those judgments, as well as empowering young people to think about that as well. So I think vulnerability and the kind of amplification of vulnerability is a really crucial point that I really appreciate you raised.
Thank you very much, Amy, and also Simona for pointing this out. Now I'm looking at the time and I see the time is ticking. I'm also looking at Dragan. I see a hand raising. So Dragan, if you have something to add, please do it like
very quickly.
Okay.
In a minute. No, I just was reminded by Amy and Simona of another study that we did, and that was about how users learn online. And what turned out to be is that for most young people, the biggest challenge to online and blended learning was that they didn't know how to organize their time when learning online, and they didn't plan the tasks and the online learning responsibilities adequately, so they couldn't finish what they started. I do think that we take it for granted that we know how to manage in the online world, be it learning online, be it now not to waste time, but the other aspects that Amy and Simona spoke about, and we do need education about it. So I fully agree with what Alessandra and the others are also stating, that we do need to get educated on how to manage online. And I don't think that we provided the moment enough education and support to young people in school or out of school, also in youth work.
Yes, thank you. And this is also being commented again, always by Alessandra. So yeah, I guess we are on the point, but also we are on the verge of the end of our time. So I would ask one last question to you all, and it's indeed already a bit in this direction. So we would need to have some, concrete tips and indications from your side. And I'm asking to the three of you, maybe starting from you, Dragan, this time, exactly about how we can support digital well-being in online spaces and environment, especially for the ones, of course, which have longer time to spend in those spaces and environments, not depending only on their will, for instance, schools or other kind of activities or jobs. But in general, we would like to kind of build up a little list of practical tips of how to ensure the most possible well-being conditions in activities that are held online. So we have a framework. We heard some very interesting point about how to shape things in this framework. And now maybe we can end trying to be as much practical and concrete as we can to share tips and tricks for everybody listening to us on how to try to ensure the well-being in the digital domain. Dragan, I would start from you, please.
Very often, and I'm sure many of you have seen this, when somebody facilitates an activity online, when we start, we usually say, make sure you have your water or tea or another liquid next to you, and make sure that you sit in a comfortable position. And then once in a while, like after 1 hour, you can ask participants to stand up and to move a little bit. So I think it's in the small things. I think it's not forgetting that we still live in physical bodies, and we do have physical needs, and it's just always trying to show a positive example, and always trying to incorporate such small elements that I don't think are small at the end of the day, because they add up in hours and in days and in months. And that was obvious. I think it became obvious when the pandemic hit, and when people were spending whole trainings and whole working days online, glued on their laptops. And then I think we got the habits of taking care of ourselves. But then nowadays, I don't see it happening so much anymore. I think we forgot that we have to, we also have to move, and we have to listen to what our body says. There was a stand-up comedian who once made a comparison. He said, I think it was about university professors, but it does refer to different people, that they use their bodies to keep their heads and to move their heads around. So we should not forget that our bodies also have their own needs, and it's not just to keep our head in front of the laptop, but it's also to take care in a more holistic way of our own health and well-being, online and offline.
Thank you, Dragan. So we kind of mentioned university and professors, so why not asking Amy her own private and personal tips and tricks to ensure this?
Yeah, I'm really bad with practical tips. But I think for me, I think the important thing is that the thing that works for you might not work for others, and what works will differ. And to really ensure we understand that, I think open communication is key. And so I often say that at talks to parents, that I think are one of our main challenges is to keep that open communication about technologies with children and young people, especially as there's a fear as if something goes wrong online, and things will go wrong online because online is just part of their life now, that would lead to repercussions like phones being taken away, kind of very kind of internet being withdrawn, for example. And that actually that kind of open communication around the digital world and what we will experience is really important. And I think that's the same in the workplace or in the facilitation, that often with online meetings and events, that sort of personal communication is a lot harder. So for example, in my team, we try to make a lot of time for figuring out how we can reflect and communicate even in these hybrid times that we live in. So I think communication for me is the key thing across many different kind of areas of digital well-being.
Thank you very much. Simona.
Okay, so I would say for me, the most important thing is to get back to the basics. So meaning that when, in my experience, when we are working in a digital framework, then more is not more. More is less, meaning that we really, like, some of these things that have happened organically and by learning, by making mistakes, is that if you used to have a 90-minute session in a working room, you can't have more than 40 to max 60 minutes online of the session, without, and then a break. So just these dynamics, like scaling down certain things and just make things more simple. People have a different attention span and they have a harder time following processes online, or we just function differently when we're online. So adapt to that and really scale it down, strip down ballast, as we say it in Slovenian language, and just really focus on the core. I think this would be for me the most important one. And then just really to support what Dragan said, because I think making sure that people can be comfortable in their bodies, in all its complexity, both physical needs that you're actually physically comfortable and everything that Dragan was explaining, but also in terms of how we emotionally react, so that people have some ways that we offer to young people, some ways of support when they are being emotionally distressed, also in digital processes. If they're learning, they're going to have challenges with that process and experience frustration. When they're working with other people in a group, they are going to get triggered by something. We are going to say something that is going to offend someone and is going to be disrespectful. And then all of these kind of things, they have an impact. So just offer ways and support mechanisms how people can then also manage this within their body, within the emotional experience of the process. I think this is another one. And then the third one, which goes also with this back to the basics, is like, that we should not forget the fact that it's super important to have group agreements, like lay down the basics of our interactions, like we do it in physical space. We do it by now online, but just not to forget, because if we assume that everyone knows what kind of codes of communication we are using in a new group, then we're very likely to not be on the same page. So I think these are the three most important for me. And then the last one, which I would just repeat something that I said before, is that it's I think from my personal experience, is very important that we have the capacity to keep in mind the diversity of our group. That that we are going to have on the other side people that we don't know all their histories, we don't know all the aspects of their identities and their social experiences, and then just to try to reflect that and create a safer space for them, without having to know all the details, but just to create a space where people can feel safe, regardless of their backgrounds.
Thank you very much, Simona, as well. So there was a lot of different insights and elements that our audience will have to process, and also our participants in the training course. They will have some quite serious elements to digest and to discuss. Now, before closing, we already had a spoiler about the graphic recording that Dace Anderson prepared for the discussion today, which is now here being shared by Limonas. Thank you, by the way, and thank you, Dace, of course. And you see that it goes in different boxes to show all the different steps that we went through our discussion today. So different elements, equal access, support system, differences, and different things affecting different people, mental health. Of course, we still need to have an offline dimension together with the search and the struggle for connectedness, empathy, and a lot more, which will be shared online in our channels together with upcoming, as always, article summing up the content of our discussion today. Before closing, I have a couple of announcements. So I'm now sharing my own screen to show everybody something, which is this one. So talking about well-being, there is this upcoming series of online conferences. Be hopefully able to see. Something is wrong with the screen sharing, I guess. Oops, let me try again. Sorry, but something was wrong with the screen sharing. So let me try again and let's see if I can make it. All right. Of course, we started with some trouble, so now we're ending with others and more. Let's see if this time we can make it. Oh, for some reason, I can't share with you the image of the ID talks, which are promoted by Salto Inclusion and Diversity, and which are now shared also in the links. So be sure to follow them. They were starting in the following weeks and will be a series of online panels and discussion up to April. And of course, there will be one next panel discussion in the series of our digital transformers, which will be on March the 7th, and it will be about ethics and digital rights. So we, of course, looking forward to have you all in our audience for March 7. And of course, be sure to have a look at the ID Talks next edition. Maybe let's try another time if I can make it to share the screen and show you also the QR code to scan to get to the page where you can get more information about them. Let me try one last time. Okay. I don't know if you are maybe see the page sharing. Let me know something, because I kind of freeze while. So if you can see it, there is a QR code to scan to get to the page of ID Talks. Okay, you can see, perfect. So then you are also able to scan the QR code and get there, and you will see that ID Talks is a series of meetings about understanding mental health happening in the upcoming weeks, organized by Salto Inclusion and Diversity. So be sure to follow these discussions and online meetings and to learn more about that topic, and also mark down our next panel discussion regarding ethics and digital rights on March the 7th. And that said, I'm super happy to thank our guests. Thanks for so many useful tips and insight you shared with us. Really, it was, I think, a very interesting discussion. It was for me, for sure. So thank you again, and let's meet somewhere soon to go on discussing about digital well-being. Bye, everybody, and thanks for following us. Bye.